This was my problem with the He Gets a Super Bowl commercial, is I'm fairly confident Jesus wouldn't have spent over $25 million on a commercial that aired during the Super Bowl. Pretty sure we could have found a lot better uses for that $25 million. So,
did you get that in like you saw that somewhere?
Actually, I saw it was $28 million because they aired a couple. I think they aired 2 commercials.
Goodness gracious.
And I think it was $28 million.
So then I'm jumping to, you don't think Jesus is worth $28 million? You don't think airtime for Jesus
I think that
is worth $28 million, Chip?
I think we would have had a lot better return on the investment for the kingdom to do some hands and feet of Jesus mission work with $28 million instead of marketing work for $28 million. However, that being said, I like the commercial.
Sure.
Just saying.
Welcome to Let's Talk About That, the podcast where we take a deeper dive into Sunday's message and explore any questions you might have. I'm your host, AJ Stevens, joined by lead pastor Chip Parker, and I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you. Whether you're a longtime member of the Orchard or a first-time visitor, Let's Talk About That is your space to explore, reflect, and connect. Join us as we navigate the intricacies of faith, spirituality, and daily life, seeking to understand how the wisdom shared on Sundays can be applied to our modern challenges. So, grab a cup of coffee, find a comfortable space, and let's dive in together. This is Let's Talk About That, where the conversation about Sunday's message never stops. Well, here we go. We are back together, Chip, Parker, and myself, and we just jumped into a brand new series, so I'm excited to unpack some of that. We had a lot going on yesterday, really a lot going on this weekend. I think February 10th might have just been the busiest day of the year. Granted, we're early in the year.
Well, I would say for you.
For me.
Sure.
Sure.
For sure.
For me.
Because you had church obligation.
Yeah.
You had family obligation. And you had AJ always finds fun stuff to do.
Yeah, that's the perfect storm, really, But even we had chamber ball. I had a lot of people at the chamber ball, and then it seemed like everybody's birthday party.
Chamber ball is my favorite picture. I saw somebody post of chamber ball, and this is in Lake City, Columbia County Chamber. Not all the chambers do it at the same time, but somebody, put a picture of themselves and their husbands like ready for adult prom,
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I love the embracing of that. Like, just send it,
I asked one of our students who got to go because her mom gets to go every year, and she works with her, and said, what did you think? What was your first experience of the chamber ball like? And she said exactly that. She was like, it was like an adult prom. It was just as awkward as an adult prom. Nobody would dance. Nobody did any of that, the whole shebang. But
well, that's because they weren't playing Usher, I'm sure.
Man, we will get to Usher. Don't you worry about that. That's good. But first, here's the thing. Okay, if you made it this far, you haven't turned us off, that's great, because I have a question that's about to put your brain in a blender.
All
and...
right. I'm here for it.
Yeah.
I'm ready for it.
Okay,
right. This is the podcast.
This
right?
has
you know what I mean?
Nothing to do with anything spiritual, just strictly a phenomenal jumping off point.
Well, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that. So I asked a couple of my friends this because I saw it and it put my brain in a blender. And I was like, I don't know where the line stops. So I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
And then if you're listening and you disagree with whatever comes out of our mouth next, I would love for you to send us some feedback on that. But here's the question. Are you familiar with Pinocchio?
Yes.
Okay. The premise behind Pinocchio, for any of you who aren't, A, get out from under your rock. B,
is there really anybody who's not?
I sure hope not. But if you are in fact ignorant to how Pinocchio works, he is a wooden boy, toy thing, whatever, in his...
Not boy toy. He is a wooden puppet that is wanting to become a real boy.
Yes, but wasn't he like originally a real boy and then got turned into a puppet?
No, he was a puppet made by Geppetto who wanted a son.
Oh, word, okay. All right, so should we start the podcast
with
over? Start over. I feel shame. Should we start this over?
Keep going.
Okay. All right. So you got Pinocchio, right? Anyway, here's what I understand about Pinocchio. When he lies, his nose grows, okay? When he lies, his nose grows.
Yes.
When he tells the truth, it means his nose does not grow.
That is correct.
All right, so here's the question. What would happen if Pinocchio said, quote, my nose is about to grow?
Well, I would say that his nose would not grow.
And then if it didn't grow, wouldn't that make him a liar?
No.
Why?
The word about.
My nose is about to grow. So you're saying at any point in a given future.
Exactly. It's an unspecified time, which means that sometime in the near future, if he were to tell a lie and his nose would grow, then this statement then would be true.
So because it's ambiguous and
because
the word about.
Yep. It's all about.
Okay. So if he said
my nose will now grow, his
Okay.
head would explode.
So let's say he says, my nose will now grow. What happens?
His head explodes. That's exactly what happens.
His head explodes.
Which, I mean, in case we are ever taken over by sentient AI robots, this is the question that defeats them all.
Yeah.
You have to tell them that I'm lying to you now,
Okay, why?
because it'll make their head explode. Because if you're lying to them, you're telling them the truth. But if you're telling the truth, then you're lying to them. So it's a logical paradox.
Paradox,
It's a sign that you put on a door that will bar the sentient AI robot from entering, when on one side of the sign it says the other side of this sign is true, and they flip it over, and that side says the other side of this sign is false.
Right.
And they flip it over, the other, so you just catch them in a logical paradox. And
Paradoxes.
because, we're humans, we can just say, you know what, all of life is a paradox and move on.
Deep. Let's say his head doesn't explode. What would be I got a gun to your head, his head's not allowed to explode. It's got to have one of two outcomes. What would you say?
I would say, again, his nose grows.
No. My nose will now grow.
Yes, his nose will grow, but at the pace that everybody's nose grows naturally. And so not jumping forward in the pace of, hey, I just lied and my nose grows.
I'm a real boy.
But the natural growth, I don't know. His head explodes. I'm sticking with my head.
It just combusts. Oh, man. Well, there you go. The opener. AJ knows less about Pinocchio than he thought. And Pinocchio's head explodes. That's
What
great.
was the cat's name?
I have no idea. Jiminy Cricket's the only thing.
You got Jiminy Cricket, you got Geppetto, and then there's the cat in Pinocchio. We have our genius
know what the cat's
resident
name is?
producer, Chris. Do we know what the cat's name is?
Hit us with a quick Google search while
Google
we're
it for us, Chris. We got to figure this out.
The cat's
Man.
name in Pinocchio.
Figaro?
There's somebody right
Figaro.
now.
I'm going with Figaro. Is that
it
it?
Figaro?
Chris agrees. We're going to look it up and see.
Somebody listening right now screaming at the radio, it's Figaro, or whatever the name is, right?
Bold of you to think that people listening to this are listening to it on the radio.
Figure, thumbs up from
Figaro,
Chris. Wow.
let's go.
A well of useless knowledge.
Do you
Chip
know
Parker.
about
That's great.
Pinocchio?
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. I don't. I am the kind of person who's wired to remember the scenes that create serotonin dumps in my brain and neglect everything else.
See, that feels like an excuse.
It is, in fact, a reason.
Oh,
But
here we
that's a
go.
great
What a
jumping off
transition.
point. So here we go. This week, we just started a brand new series called Excuses. And excuses are like these things, right? I got you. You guys were leading us with good comedy as I lead you one direction and then I pivot. But excuses are these things that we often have. And I think sometimes for us as people, we know we're making an excuse, air quotes. And then other times we think, no, this is just a legitimate reason. You don't need to see this as an excuse. And then there creates this tension because the person who just got offended or the person who was dishonored by the excuse or reason doesn't feel like it's sufficient or legitimate. And so now we have one person who said, here's my reason for, let's say, being late. The other person says, I don't care. It's still rude to be late. There's not a good enough reason, right, or excuse. And then it creates this tension of, well, what's an excuse? What's a reason? What's justified? What's not? What's legitimate? What's just you making stuff up and trying to feel good about this?
Well, I think, and if you haven't heard the message, go back, find it online, listen to it. Because what I would say is that there's a couple layers here. First is that an excuse or a reason is given because of a failure on one part or another, right?
Okay.
And the excuse or reason, the legitimacy of either is not the point, because neither one changes the reality of the failure at hand.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't want to discount the fact that there are legitimate reasons why we drop the ball sometimes, and they are reasons. But in the end, the difference between excuses and reasons is just a very nebulous cloud of plausibility and legitimacy, but neither one ultimately fixes anything.
If neither one really fixes anything, then we're really trying to get to, I guess, the foundation of the issue, right? Which is the fact that we're prone to make them or have them or use them. And it seems to me that, at least as far as I understand it, because I know myself, and I know that I'm a lot more likely to dig my heels in with an excuse or reason whenever I feel like it's justified, right? As opposed to whenever it's like, all right, I know I'm wrong. Like, I'm gonna beat this around a little bit, and then eventually I'm gonna be like, hey man, I just gotta shoot you straight.
Yeah.
Like, it just wasn't on my radar kind of thing. And so if there's a difference, or if there's not necessarily a difference, and there's this nebulous cloud. And
it's not that I don't think it's a difference. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't change reality.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. Like at the end of the day, it doesn't change the reality. And I think that the point you're making, AJ, is what you just said, is that when we are our own arbiter of whether this is an excuse or a reason, that's where the slope can get slippery sometimes, right? Because I think we are not as self-aware nor know our own heart as we would like to think about ourselves.
Speak for yourself.
AJ's most subjective about his own objectivity. That's our running joke. I'm just not self-aware about anything. So we have, that idea that, we think that it's a reason and other people see it as an excuse. And so it is that plausibility, legitimacy, which goes back to my quote from Sunday that I used that I heard from a high school football coach, is that excuses only satisfy the people who make them. Right? Because, and you're ready, I didn't throw this in Sunday, here's part B, because if it satisfies the other person, then it's a reason.
Sure. So when the other person's satisfied, it becomes a reason. So what do you do with that? Like, does that in turn put the responsibility or the obligation on the person who's receiving the excuse to be somehow a little more gracious, or how does that work?
I mean, I don't know. I do think that one of the things we talk about often at the Orchard, and I think it's a great habit for us to get into, is being able to give other people the benefit of the doubt. And I think that is a healthy habit for us to get into. However, I think the bigger issue with excuses is not whether it's an excuse or a reason. I think at the end of the day, you just have to look at your own heart and say, okay, am I explaining something or am I justifying something?
Yeah.
And I think that, again, even that line is really blurry, but at the end of the day, most of us make excuses because we don't like to be wrong.
Yeah.
We don't like to accept blame. We don't like it to be our fault. So there has to be something else at play that made this happen. And I really think that's probably why there's such a predominant pull in our flesh to make an excuse when we're wrong, is because we need something else to at least be partly at fault here. So it's not totally on me being a hot pile of garbage.
So then, is there a difference between me making an excuse with another human or a reason with another human and me making an excuse or having a reason for why I dropped the ball with God?
Yeah, probably. And again, I think that with other people, like, don't mishear us. There are legitimate reasons why you drop the ball sometimes.
Yeah.
And as humans, we're never going to completely, perfectly never drop a ball, right? But when it comes to God, I think that, so often our attempts to justify ourselves before God are what push us further from Him, when what we think in our own head is it's going to keep us closer to Him. And it just works against itself, right? We think if we make this excuse about why we sinned, why we dropped the ball here, why we haven't been in church, why we're not teaching our kids this, why we're whatever, we think that, okay, well, if I make this excuse before God, it's going to keep me close to God because it wasn't my fault. But at the end of the day, those excuses do nothing but push us further away from God. And that's why I'm so excited about this series, because in this series, we see God just like blow open all of our excuses. The passage from this Sunday in Genesis 18, Sarah says, I didn't laugh. And yet the pre-incarnate Jesus looks at her and says, yeah, you did.
Yeah.
I mean, like, leaves no room for that. Says, no, you did laugh.
Yeah. So why do you think, I guess we'll talk about the human layer, because I think it'll reveal something about our layer in these conversations with God. But I also think if we focus on the layer from person to person, it helps us understand maybe a little bit more about ourselves. And so then we can kind of influence, that can kind of trickle into our relationship with God. Yeah, so if I'm sitting across the room from you, or for you listening, if you're sitting across the room from somebody else and they've just told you, hey, you forgot about XYZ and you didn't do this or take care of this, and you start to come up with your reason, your excuse, and maybe you had a legitimate one, I think what that starts to do is it starts to show you where you struggle, where you're wrong, where you're inept, whatever, right? And so the human relationships that we have start to show us just where the gap is, and we start to make excuses, right? Where our faults are, where the other person's faults are. The difference being, when we do this to God, it's a one-sided thing, right? Like there is no abstract, hey, hopefully they'll let that go, or hopefully it'll be okay, right? Because it's not they anymore. It's not another agent who's prone to make the same mistakes. It's a consistent creator who's in control of everything, who's omnipotent. He just is, right?
And he sees our hearts better than we do.
Yeah, 100%.
Which, you just made me think of something, though, that I think is maybe helpful. Oftentimes, maybe one of the best reasons that we can give a reason, or the best reasons we can give an excuse, is not to justify our actions, but to make sure our actions aren't misunderstood.
Sure.
So, for instance, I forgot our anniversary, wife, not because I don't love you and value you, but because I'm an idiot. Like, hey, I don't want you to hear this as something it's not, so let me tell you what else was going on here.
Yes.
Like, for instance, hey, my son couldn't make baseball practice today. It's not because he is not excited about baseball, wants to be a part of the team, wants to work and get better. It's because grandpa was sick and we had to carry him to the doctor.
Right.
Doesn't change reality. It does help us better understand the heart and motive of the person who let us down, so to speak, right?
Yes.
But when it comes to God, he already sees that motive.
Right.
He already knows what's going on in our heart. And so that's why, maybe when it comes to our relationship with God, instead of offering excuses or even offering reasons, maybe we go to God and say, hey, why don't you help me see the reason that I dropped the ball on this? Because you see it better than I do.
Right. And so that's what's going to be my lead in is, so why do you think we're so prone to doubt God? Why do you think we're so prone to make excuses? Because I can doubt you, right? I know that Chip's not perfect. Chip knows that AJ's not perfect. So it's easy to doubt each other in certain moments. But what makes us so prone to doubt God or to make excuses to him whenever we have these moments?
I think there's a couple of reasons that it's easy to doubt God. First and foremost, it's easy to doubt God because you don't see him, right? And if we're just being very honest and transparent, for a lot of us, God is not a 24/7, 365 reality in our lives. There are moments when we forget that there's a whole nother part of reality of unseen spiritual realms that are impacting what's going on, and all we think is this jerk in front of me in the drive-thru won't move.
Yeah,
you know? And so sometimes I think we doubt God because we are quick to forget the reality of God. But I think the other part of that is that we are quick to doubt God really because, he hasn't in the past. He didn't in the past. And so now we're not sure that he will in the future.
Right.
And we really kind of, in Lake City, I'll say, pressed into that a little bit on Sunday, is that we let our past shape what we believe about God in the future. And so if God didn't help me get the last job that I wanted, why would I believe he's going to help me get this one? Right. If God didn't save my last marriage, why do I believe that he's going to help save this one? If God didn't heal my grandmother of cancer, why would I believe he's going to heal my father of cancer?
Yeah.
And so we let he didn't make us believe that he won't. And so I think that's maybe another reason why it's easy to doubt God sometimes.
Yeah. So what alleviates that tension?
I think that...
Let me ask it a little more clear, I guess.
Yeah.
What fixes that? Like, what fixes the person who's struggling because God didn't do X, Y, Z? What helps them to remove a layer of doubt that's there from experience, right? Mm-hmm. And moving into, all right, well, I guess I should just not doubt the God that just let me down, right?
Well, so first and foremost, I don't know there's anything ever fixes that.
Sure.
Like, for those of you who are listening, most of you, I'm sure, know my story. Yesterday was my mom's birthday, right? But it's been 10 years since she passed away. So she would have been 61 yesterday. And I think it's unrealistic for me to say that I don't still have some scars from that. And, maybe I'm slow to doubt, hey, is God going to heal somebody in this situation? I mean, he didn't, so would he now? So I think that just being very transparent, I'm not sure you ever completely, quote, fix that. I think what we have to do, and again, we talked about this in the message, and we're going to have to talk about this more in the future, is really decide what has God promised and what has God said. Because God never promised that he was going to heal my mom.
Right.
And maybe it's a good time to tell the story because I don't know that everybody has got to hear it. But when my mom was in the hospital going through a bone marrow transplant, but his only option to offer some hope for a cure of terminal cancer was a bone marrow transplant. Her slogan that she gave her updates on Facebook and everything and kind of, ended every post with, "My God is big, my faith is strong." And so being from a small town like Perry, Florida, everybody, you know, who knew our family, loved my mom, you know, that was their thing. They made T-shirts. They made those little rubber bracelets. My God is big. My faith is strong. Relay for Life that year, all over the place. My God's big. My faith is strong. And, you know, when Mom ultimately passed away, I think there were some lingering questions and doubts in people's minds. Well, what happened? God was big. Her faith was strong. And what I understood that I think a lot of people didn't is that what she meant by that was not, I believe that God has promised to heal me, that I know that God's going to heal me, that my God is able, and my faith is so strong that I know that God's going to heal me. What she meant was that my God is big and my faith is strong no matter the outcome of this.
Yeah.
Because I believe that he is able and he will do what he's promised, and yet I know that he's not promised this, but I still believe because of his character, I can trust him.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think that's what faith really looks like is, hey, I'm not sure what the outcome of this looks like. And so, yeah, maybe I doubt what God is going to do, but I believe that I can trust him in spite of my doubts about what's going to happen. And then I think the way that we know we can trust him is when we look back in our past and see where other things did not go how we thought they would, and yet we can trace the hand of God's faithfulness through some of those events.
Yeah.
And I'm not dumb enough to think that everybody can look back and say, oh, there was this terrible thing that happened in my life. Look, something good came out of it. I've been very open and upfront, you know, even if I knew specifically what God was doing and the good that came out of my mom passing away, I'm not sure I'd make that trade.
Yeah.
In my flesh, I'm not sure I'd make that trade. That does not negate that God does bring good out of those situations when we see it, when we don't. But when we can see it, we can trust that, okay, even if it doesn't happen again, it doesn't mean he's not there, doesn't mean he's not able, doesn't mean he doesn't care. And it doesn't necessarily mean he won't the next time. You know, just because God hasn't in the past don't mean he won't in the future.
So why do you think, and I'm going to say for people, but also I guess for you, because you just got honest with us for a second, why do you think that's such a struggle? Because even as you're telling that story, I hear a sense of struggle with, well, I wouldn't have made that trade, right? Which means in a way there's a sense of, I don't know if doubt's the right word, but there's a level of, I don't like that choice, right? And so why do you think that's such a struggle? Why do you think that there's not just the, I'm coming to terms with this, but I like these terms?
Yeah, I think that you look in the Old Testament specifically, and even in the New Testament, I think you see a lot of people who struggle with the choices God made.
Yeah.
You know, like the entire book of Habakkuk is written about them saying, God, I'm not sure you're making the best decision here.
Yeah.
But at the end, trust and faith comes in the resignation and humility that God sees farther than I do. Mm-hmm. He knows better than I do, and he loves deeper than I ever will. And so with what I know, with what I see, with what I feel, I would make a different decision. But there's enough humility to know that, thank goodness, that God's not limited to my perspective on things, because at the end, I can say in my flesh I would make a different decision, and yet at the same time, no, that would be the wrong decision. And how do I know it was the wrong decision? Because it's not the one God made. Yeah. And I know a lot of people, you know, especially if you're skeptical about faith and you're listening to that, it's like, circular logic, 100%.
Yeah.
100%, you know, and I'm totally okay with that, because all logic is circular. Are you going to trust yourself, or are you going to trust something else? It's all inside authority, outside authority. And I choose to believe that God knows better than I do, makes better decisions than I do. And so I think that we can grow into, this was for the best. I think we're naive to think that comes quickly. And I think maybe even naive to think that comes completely this side of eternity.
Sure.
So for instance, you know, again, personal, back with my mom, I've seen a lot of family members, and even been part of other family members, that we've had to sit beside bedsides and watch them deteriorate away and not be in their right mind. And why is God just leaving them here to suffer like this? And I don't have to think that about my mom, because, you know, she passed away young and early, and I don't like it. But at the same time, she got to have a good quality of life for most of her life. We didn't have to, spend the last decade of her life, nursing her in health in a way that created, a small amount of resentment because of what it was taking to care for her. And so I do think that there's grace in that. So I see what God did and I see some of the good in it. But just, 10 years later, I'm still at the place it hurts. I'm still at the place that it's not what I think I would have done. And yet I think that I can have hurt and maybe even a little doubt, but that doesn't ever have to conflict with faith nor lead to anger.
So I'm listening and I'm out there and I'm not somebody who would consider themselves tight with God or maybe say to the level of faith or have the level of faith that you have. How do I get there? How do I get to that point? How do I get to the point where I am just angry? I don't like it. I'm making the excuses. I have 1,000 reasons I would have done something different. And I want to get to the place that, I'm comfortable trusting God. Even if there's a little bit of doubt, I'm comfortable trusting that he's good. He hasn't changed. He doesn't change who he is in his goodness, all that kind of stuff.
So when you look in Ephesians, particularly Ephesians chapter 2, it's very clear that faith is a gift of God. And I think that it's fairly clear in some places in Scripture that some have great faith and some not so much. And to be honest, I'm not sure that I have a great faith. I'm not sure I have a gift of large faith. I'm pretty skeptical, cynical. But I do think, all that said, it's okay to ask God to increase my faith.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like the father of the son who was possessed by a demon and the disciples couldn't cast out the demon. And, he comes to Jesus and, he tells them, I believe, help my unbelief.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where a lot of us are. So I think getting honest, asking God to grow our faith. And then the hardest part of the answer is your faith doesn't grow until it's pushed, until it's stressed, until it's strained. So your faith isn't going to grow into these situations until you're on the other side of them.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest things about our story from Sunday with Sarah is she really doesn't have a chance to debate with God here. It's just God saying, hey, you're about to go through this process and I'm about to push you, I'm about to stretch you. And then on the other side of this process, you're going to realize this whole thing was a gift, but it's not going to come until I stretch you, until I grow you, until I do these things in your life. And so I don't know. I think it's tricky. I think the reason I'm asking that question is because I think there's people out there who are listening and they're like, well, that's just not my situation. That's just not where I'm at. That's just not how I operate. And so I think any tangible tools to help people get to the place where they feel like they can trust God. But I would also say this. I would say to kind of come on the backside of that, man, like a big part of faith being a gift, a big part of trusting a God is being in relationship with that God. And
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
man, if you're listening and you're just struggling and you're not sure where you're at, I would say step one would be evaluate your relationship with this God, right? Figure out who this God is that you're talking about or talking to, and then evaluate where you're at in that relationship process, because I think it is a lot easier to trust a father, right, than it is to trust somebody I don't know or something.
Yeah, that's 100% spot on. That's good.
lines.
That's good. And I think that, another piece of this, just kind of moving on in a different direction, but, using this as the starting point, is that I personally, after my mom passed away, found it easy to make excuses for God in the future.
Okay, what do you mean?
So he didn't, and so I'm not sure he will in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and just provide some outs for God.
This is that cynicism
In
we
case
talked
he
about
doesn't,
earlier.
yeah. And it became, a lot harder to ask, hey, God, would you heal
Yeah.
in this situation? And so, and again, so let me preface this by saying I'm not taking shots at anybody. This is not what everybody means when they say this, but hey, this is the podcast. This is what we do.
Right.
I found myself praying all my prayers of asking God to do something in somebody's life with, if it be your will.
If it be your will. Just kind
According
of
to your will. And again, to be clear,
Yeah.
God is going to do what's according to his will, and we should pray according to his will and seek his will, but that's not what I was doing. I'm not, hey, God, I believe this is your will, so would you do this? If it's not your will, help me see it's not your will.
Right.
It was, God, would you do this, but just in case you don't, only do it according to your will. And just using that as an out. And so God really challenged my, faith in that. And, when I'm praying, I'm not telling God what to do. I'm not invoking rituals and incantations that force God's hand. God is not
He's not like, God, he got me with that one.
He's not a vending machine, nor a tribal deity, you know? And so what I came to peace with, and God just kind of challenged me through, got me to the place of, hey, you ask what you want to see me do.
Right.
And you just got to be open-handed whether or not I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, I've really quit praying if it's your will.
Right.
Because I know, hey, if it's not, I mean, I'm not going to force his hand here, you know, but I'm going to be unafraid to ask. God, I believe you can heal this person. So I'm asking, would you?
Yeah.
Would you please?
Yeah,
it's my desire that you would, you know, and then if it's your will, kind of comes in saying, I'm not going to be angry if it's not, because I trust that you do have a plan. Not me giving you an out, but just, you know, again, you know my heart, God. I want you to do this, but I understand it's not going to happen if it's not your will, but I'm going to be unafraid to ask you to, because I do believe you can.
Yeah. I think that's good to hear from you, because as I understand your story, especially with your mom, it's kind of a full circle thing where that wasn't how you were day one, right? Like that wasn't your initial response day one, but now you're at a point where it's like, hey, God, like I'm going to ask, I'm going to kind of suppress some of the cynicism here, and I'm just going to lean in, and
which is why, again, I don't think I have a great faith, you know, I have to suppress a lot of cynicism sometimes, you know, and I think miracles are miracles because they don't happen often.
Right.
I think when we read the scriptures a lot of time and we see miracles on almost every page, it's like, oh my gosh, what are we missing in our lives because we're not seeing miracles every week? Well, I mean, when you look at the time frame that Scripture covers, they weren't happening every week then either. It's just and it's in Scripture because it's a highlight, you know? And so again, that's not to say God doesn't do miracles. He absolutely does. I believe that we should be unashamedly willing to ask him to do those, and yet understand that when he does, that is out of the norm, thus why they are miraculous.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. It's good. So as we're kind of talking through excuses, man, just, I guess, keep that in mind. That's an encouraging piece there, that you don't have to make excuses for God, right? Like, he is completely capable. And I think the one thing that we probably struggle with more often than not is making excuses for him, or making ourselves the excuse for him. Like, well, I just didn't, you know, it was me, God. I was the reason why, or whatever.
Oh, ye of little faith.
Right.
You know, man, I didn't look at this ahead of time. So you guys know that a lot of this is just like free flow, honest conversation. We do a little bit of prep, but not all of it. But what's the scripture where it said that Jesus was unable to do, you know, some miracles in
his hometown,
in the hometowns because of their lack of faith?
Yeah.
You know? And so, number one, I have some conflict about unable to do. What does that mean? You know, because God's God, he can do whatever he wants.
Right.
You know, but that idea that, you know, oh, God, I didn't have enough faith. So that's the reason that you let it down. Matter of fact, oh, wow, cool story. So I was reading, and there was a story of a tribal in India village. It wasn't in India, Middle Eastern maybe. They had a young child that they believed to be a prophet of God. And this 12-year-old tribe believed that, or this 12-year-old in the tribe believed that God was telling them that he was going to provide for all of their needs in such a miraculous way that they were to sacrifice all of their cattle in order to show their faith in God that he would provide. And so they do that. Wow. Long story short, the tribe starves to death. And instead of saying, maybe this 12-year-old's not a prophet of God, they say, well, there was these two families that didn't participate in sacrificing their cows, and they're the reason that we all starved to death.
Interesting.
So it was like, you know, it's kind of the whole, well, we were the reason. Yeah. And instead of getting too far into this, because we're going to talk about this next week,
right?
I do think it's the, well, God could never use me kind of thing. Or if he didn't do it, then it must have been my fault.
Yeah.
And, you know, in fairness, I do think sometimes we have a piece to play in that. But maybe we need to get to the place where we understand that God factors our stupidity into his sovereignty as well.
His sovereignty, yes. And I think that is a huge piece of this, because even when you look into Sarah's story, Abraham's story, you see, I believe, his sovereignty on display, right? All the way to the point where he steps into the equation, unless you think that's an unpopular opinion. So here's where I would say we jump into our nerd out section. As I see this, I see these three individuals, and you mentioned the Sunday, and I would love for you to expound on it, because one of the things you said Sunday was, we don't really have time to jump into that, but I really do want to jump into that. So you mentioned one of these three being the pre-incarnate Jesus. I would love for you to give us your why behind that.
All right, so let's pull up the text right here. So I'm pulling up, opening my Bible right here, and we're in Genesis chapter 18, right? That's the story. This is not the first part of the story. The story starts way back, when God visits Abram. Now he's Abraham. And in Genesis 18, verse 1, which we did not read Sunday, it says, "The Lord appeared to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the heat of the day." So number one, I think, it says the Lord right there, okay? And then in verse 2, it says he looked up and saw three men standing near him. Okay. And so we say, okay, the Lord appeared to him, but now these three men are there. And so he goes to them, he runs to them, says, hey, come eat, have a meal, whatever. And he goes to Sarah, says, fix this meal for him. Verse 9 is where we picked up Sunday. Where's your wife, Sarah? They asked him there in the tent. And then verse 10, the Lord said, right? And after you look at that word Lord is not the master, which is actually used another place in this chapter. It is a divine title. The Lord said, I will certainly come back to you in about a year's time. Your wife, Sarah, will have a son. Sarah was listening to the entrance of the tent. We know this story, right? So she laughs. And then verse 13, it says, but the Lord, again, same word, divine title. Why did Sarah laugh? He heard her laugh internally.
Yeah.
So he's showing divine attributes
the only other
besides the divine name.
Well, my understanding, where's the only other time we see this happen? In the New Testament with Jesus, the guy being lowered from the roof.
Paralytic and his four boys.
Yes, and he starts to tell them what they're thinking before they say it out loud, and there's this moment of, oh my gosh, we just got our minds read. Surely this is...
That's right.
The Son of God, right?
Is it easier for the Son of Man to forgive sins or to say, get up and walk?
Yeah, right. So maybe a good indicator there too.
Yeah, for sure. So I do think that one of these three men is the pre-incarnate Jesus. That means pre-incarnate, before the incarnation. The incarnation is when God became man. Jesus wrapped himself in human flesh inside of Mary's womb. That is the incarnation. This is no less Jesus, but it is Jesus before the incarnation.
Yeah.
And I would say, if this sounds wild and crazy to you, it is a long-held belief of the church.
Yeah,
that this happens in several places. That's right, Christophanies.
Yeah,
happens in many places.
I say Christophanies. I know what Christophanies are. You know that maybe you're listening. You don't know what those are. What does that mean?
Christophany is a appearance of Christ in his pre-incarnate form. Theophany is an appearance of God. Christophany is the appearance of Christ. Sometimes in the Old Testament, we're not sure which it is, but since Trinity, yes.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Trinity,
so,
yes.
But that is what a Christophany is. So the pre-existence of Jesus is the real, personal, pre-incarnate existence of the second person in the Trinity, Jesus himself, before he took on flesh in the incarnation and was born, right? And I think there's several places in Scripture that give evidence of the pre-existence of Jesus before the incarnation. We read in John chapter 1, verse 1, right? The Word was with God. The Word was God.
Yeah.
The Son exists before creation. There's other places we see that.
Colossians by him, through him, for him.
Colossians 1:17, Philippians 2:6-7, right? We read that the Son dwelled in heaven. He tabernacled in heaven with the Father before taking flesh. Jesus says that in John chapter 3, John chapter 6, John chapter 8. We read that in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And then we also see Jesus talking about himself as the Son has come.
Right.
Or the Son was sent from outside of the world to enter into the world for a purpose. And we see that all over the Gospels. And so all of those, and there's a whole lot more, right? That's just a very easy to wrap our mind around. Hey, if he existed before creation, if he dwelled in heaven with the Father and then was sent to earth, what does that mean? It means that he existed in a pre-incarnate form, and we see that pre-incarnate form sometimes in the Old Testament.
There are some big implications there too. Maybe it seems like a neat little fun fact that's really kind of useless, but I think the implications are huge because what it tells us is here's Jesus before the foundations of the earth, right? Here's Jesus before all of that. And
what is the one undeniable Jesus claim to divinity in the Gospel of John? And we looked at this. If you remember, we did an I Am series here a while back. Jesus looks at the crowd and says, before Abraham was, I am.
Yeah.
Before Abraham was, I am. Pre-incarnate Christ.
Yeah. Pretty fascinating stuff. And I think it's cool because circling all the way back to what jumped us into that nerd out section, you said God is sovereign. And so I guess for me, especially as we unpack the question, well, how do I get there? How do I get to the point where I trust God? I guess I want you to hear the same God that is actively involved in our lives today is the same God that saw Sarah through this conversation, this whole situation. It's the same God that's delivered people over and over and over again throughout the timeline of the Old Testament. It's the same God that does these miraculous things in the New Testament. And it's the same God that today you go before, the same God today that desires to uphold you, to walk with you, to be with you. And so,
I'm thinking that would be a great song if we were to get that down.
What would you say?
About being the
same God?
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah. And then being able to call on that God.
Yeah. So good.
Be good.
Yeah. It's good. I like that. Let's see if we can get it in the set list. That's really cool, man. I think that's worth nerding out on because I think the implications are huge. And at the end of the day, it seems like a bunch of useless information until you realize, no, the whole reason we know this and have this is because I think the Father desires us to know He's in control and He hasn't lost control throughout the timeline of history. And that's a big deal.
Well, I think, another reason that this is important is to look at the flow of redemptive history and the privileged place of the church. And here's what I mean by that. If you look in the Garden of Eden, God Himself visited Adam and Eve in the garden. If we look after the fall, God would at times step in to the redemptive story, such as here with Abraham. He does it with Jacob when he wrestles with the Lord. He does it with Joshua, the commander of the Lord's armies. We see this over and over. And then in the New Testament, we see Jesus come and take human flesh and live and dwell, the word tabernacle, among us for a lifetime. Not a long lifetime, but for a lifetime. But then He's taken back up to heaven, right? Yeah. But now the church, we don't have God with us to visit us. We have God in us through the Spirit, the third person of the Trinity. And so I think when we look at this, it's like, oh, that's cool that God would step into history, and how awesome would that be to have that happen? We have a greater version of that with us today, the Spirit Himself, the third person of the Trinity, not the it of the Trinity, not the warm fuzzies of worship service, but the Holy Spirit, the third person of the Trinity. He lives within us.
Yeah. So, I mean, just kind of expounding on the start out section, I think it's even cooler that we have pre-incarnate Jesus who's here before, right? He takes on flesh, He does His thing. And then there's this moment in Acts where Stephen is being stoned and he's a martyr, and he looks up and what does he see? He sees Jesus seated at the right hand of the Father. And so I don't know, for me, it's so comforting because you have Him in the entire timeline, right? You've got Him in the past, you've got Him in the present, you've got Him in His human form, whatever, and then you look up and you're Stephen and you say, oh, there it is. There's the person who's been holding everything together this entire time. It's going to be okay. And it's also the sealer of this promise you're talking about. Hey, it's better for you if I leave. I got to leave so that this can come. And when Stephen looks up, there's also this subtle reminder of, hey, I've left and there's something better for you that's compelling you to do this kind of stuff. And
that's right. That's one of the craziest phrases in John's gospel is when Jesus says, I'm going away and it is good for you that I go away because I'm going to send another, the helper, the comforter, the paraclete, right?
Yeah.
And then He says, later on, you're going to do greater works than I because I go away.
Yeah.
And all that is an affirmation of the Spirit that Jesus, when He dwelt in His pre-incarnate form, one place, one time, randomly. In His incarnate form, one place, one time, for a lifetime, and then in His incarnate form post-resurrection, which was more like the pre-incarnate here and there, right? He's with his disciples for 40 days before he ascends. He comes and visits Saul on the road to Damascus. You mentioned Stephen sees him, and then he comes and visits John on the Isle of Patmos. So Jesus still has made appearances post-incarnation, but it's here and there and gone. The Spirit is with us and remains. And it's not one place at one time. It's in all believers for all time. Incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Circling back, this is the relationship that compels you to alleviate some of those doubts and help you wrestle through excuses and reasons, right?
The Spirit himself intercedes with us with groanings too deep for words, is what Paul tells us in Romans chapter 8. And what that means is that when we don't have the answers, when we doubt, when we're tempted to make excuses, we don't have to make excuses because we have the Spirit who is shaping us into the image of Jesus. And instead of making excuses on our behalf, he's crying out to the Father on our behalf.
And then when you, we don't have this much time, but and then the more you start to unpack Paul's theological implications, like in Romans 8, you start to see, hey, you've been adopted into this sonship. And so because of that Spirit, you can trust your Father. You can trust a good dad who's looking out for you, who cares for you, because the Spirit has given you this sense of adoption by which we cry out, Abba, Father, right? So just, I don't know, the whole thing just gets you excited because it's like, man, it's all here, it's all intertwined, it's all together, and it's all because this is what God has chosen to do. And so, I don't know, it's just really, really cool thing. But we'll kind of pivot off of the nerd out section a little bit and dive into maybe a little bit of more fun side of things here to kind of round it out. But there was a football game last night, and if you heard us last week, I think we...
Like Manchester United, like...
Actually heard it was a Usher concert.
You're talking about American football, the Super Bowl.
Football. Yeah, so there was a concert that we put our lines in on last week, and we told you our predictions, and both of us were dead wrong, mostly because both of us picked the 49ers. It was depressing, but you know what?
Well, the NFL's scripted, as we've said many times on this podcast.
I'm not going to lie to you. It definitely seemed a little scripted last night. Am I right? I mean, come on. It seemed a little scripted. Entertainment.
And the spirit of transparency that we have tried to establish in this podcast.
I think we're there.
I went to bed after halftime, bro. Right? I can't hang on Sunday evenings anymore. I am an old man, and I just didn't care.
Here's the moment I think I believed. Here's the moment I realized how much I believed it was scripted. Or I've just become cynical.
Because 13.
Because I'm like, every time the 49ers are doing something good, I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And then I got my buddy next to me. He's like, my stomach's in knots. I don't know what's going to happen next. And I'm like, what's going to happen next is they're going to try to create another dynasty with the Kansas City Chiefs just to dethrone Tom Brady because they want the next generation to have a Tom Brady.
Okay,
right?
So do
that's
you believe
entertainment.
The NBA was scripted with Michael Jordan?
No, I think he's a GOAT. Let's go.
So is Patrick Mahomes just not Michael Jordan on the football field? Doesn't matter who you put around him. He's going to make everybody better, and he's just going to come up clutch every time.
No, Patrick Mahomes is nothing without Andy Reid.
You know what? You can't see this, guys, but high five across the table.
I love it.
Here for it. And how dare Taylor's boyfriend yell at Andy Reid?
Honestly, that's crazy.
You know what
As
it was,
an athlete, I was like, that's crazy.
You know what it was? You've seen the commercials, obviously. Everybody's seen the State Farm commercials. Andy Reid went after Kelsey's nuggies, and Kelsey wasn't having it.
That's crazy.
You're not getting my nuggies.
That's crazy. We just said nuggies. That's crazy.
Chicken nuggies.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. So we have the best part of the Super Bowl traditionally was the ads. Did you have a favorite ad that popped up in the first half, I should say, because you went to bed for the second half?
I have not had a chance yet. You probably about 2:00 when my coffee runs out, I'll start looking at Super Bowl ads.
Sure.
The 2 Super Bowl ads that I saw that I liked, and one I didn't want to like because I was telling myself how stupid it was, and then by the end of it, I was like, crap, that was actually good. Was the Matt Damon, Jennifer Lopez Dunkin' Donuts commercial. Did you see that? The Dunkin' Boys, or
so
the Dunkings, the Dunkings.
You watched the second half, or you watched the first half. I only watched the second half, so I missed that one.
Okay, it was the Dunkings. You'll have to go back. It did have Tom Brady in it. The second commercial that I liked, and ready to receive all the emails because I've already received texts from friends.
Here we go.
I like the foot washing commercial from He Gets Us.
So let me ask you this. Chip, my goodness, why would you receive emails about a commercial that's oriented towards Jesus and him serving people?
Well, primarily because a lot of people see an ad like that, an organization like that, as maybe LGBTQ plus affirming or very progressive and liberal. And I've had really good friends who I trust and think highly of say, oh no, those are all politically motivated, driven by an agenda. And at the end of the day, I see the commercial and I see just a message that Jesus loves everybody, and that should transcend whatever political barriers the world has created.
Yeah.
You know, I know that there are some good friends who are smarter, better, theologically educated than I am, who would say that, you know, the problem with that is it's just showing a Jesus who's all about love and there's no judgment there. And I've just always wanted to be really quick, or really slow, not quick, really slow to judge people for not saying everything I think they should say in a limited format. Like, I would hate for people to build my theology off of what they see on an Instagram reel every now and then, or if they only catch one message in a series. And at the same time, and AJ, you've heard me tell our pastors this over and over and over and over and over, I don't think that we can be scared to preach the radical grace and love of Jesus for fear that people will abuse it as a license for a sinful lifestyle.
Yeah.
I just think that
Romans 5 leads into Romans 6.
Yeah. I just, you know, so I liked it. I'm okay if you didn't. Well, no, I'm okay if you didn't for the right reasons. If you didn't for some reasons, I'm not okay with it.
Do I have your permission to step into their shoes for a second and ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So then I would say, because I'm with you, I think I could go either way on this. I think there's a fuller conversation, but I'm not mad that Jesus is getting airtime, right?
Well,
even if it's just half of the equation.
I do have one part of the whole thing that bugged me, but
sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. Do you not think that this organization, he's got us, or whatever, I don't remember the actual name of the organization. Do you believe or not believe this organization has an obligation to preach both sides of the equation? Because as I understand, that would be the immediate hang-up, right? Is like, hey, yeah, he's full of grace, but also repent.
Honestly, no, I don't. And here's why, is because I think at some point we just have to say, like, look, we're not going to be able to talk about all of this all the time. And that was not the point of their message. The point of the message was not to present the gospel to people during the Super Bowl. Their point was to introduce people to Jesus in the Super Bowl and spur people to begin to look further into that, have conversations. So again, I'm not really mad if you disagree with me, and I'm ready for all the hate email, you know, about it. But let me just read to you one passage of scripture from Jesus himself in Mark chapter 9. It says, John said to Jesus, "Teacher, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he wasn't following us." "Don't stop him," said Jesus, "because there is no one who will perform a miracle in my name who can soon afterward speak evil of me. For whoever is not against us is for us. And whoever gives you a cup of water to drink in my name because you belong to Christ, truly I tell you, he will never lose his reward." And so that's kind of one of those things that I would say, would I have done the commercial a little bit differently? I don't know. Maybe, probably. But at the same time, if you just look at the merits of the commercial, I thought it was well done. I thought it got the message across. And by the way, you know, I would hope that the church would say, yeah, no matter your background, we're supposed to love you.
Yeah, absolutely. So jumping out of their shoes, I would say I would agree with you in the sense that at its face value, the commercials say, Jesus serves everyone, and unless you're of the limited atonement mindset, that's what he did on the cross, right? He served us by being the propitiation for our sin. Now, what comes next is a whole other conversation, but at its core, Jesus served us.
We're not having the limited atonement conversation on this podcast. I will say, I feel like it's kind of in some circles in vogue to bash on stuff like he gets us, to show how conservative and, you know, everything we are, how serious we are, and say, you know, it was good, you know? So I think that's kind of in vogue right now. The other thing is, this was my problem with the He Gets a Super Bowl commercial, is I'm fairly confident Jesus wouldn't have spent over $25 million on a commercial that aired during the Super Bowl. pretty sure we could have found a lot better uses for that $25 million. So
did you get that in like you saw that somewhere?
actually, I saw it was $28 million because they aired a couple. I think they aired 2 commercials.
Goodness gracious.
And I think it was $28 million.
So then I'm jumping to, you don't think Jesus is worth $28 million? You don't think airtime for Jesus
I think that
worth
we would
$28
have,
million, Chip?
I think we would have had a lot better return on the investment for the kingdom to do some hands and feet of Jesus mission work with $28 million instead of marketing work for $28 million. However, that being said, I like the commercial.
Sure.
Just saying.
Here's what I just heard. If you've got a $28 million check you've been dying to write, Chip's going to put it to good use. So make it out.
what?
Chip Park. Clarence Park.
I'll even do it for $2.8 million.
There you go. Just a percentage of the overall amount. That's good. That'll create some discussion, especially in your inbox. So
My email is aj@theorchardcc.org.
Oh, man. Well, the good news is that's not even my email. So you're writing to somebody else. Oh, man. Well, I guess we'll end with this because we're kind of coming to an end here. And just say that I think there is some nuance in this conversation. There's so much nuance that we're going to get all 4 pastors together at some point throughout this series and just talk about how we know whether it is God or not that's saying these things. And I think that'll help us decide whether or not it's something we should trust or make excuses about, so on and so forth. And so I'm excited about that roundtable discussion because I value the 3 of you guys. I value your opinions. I value your time spent in Scripture. I value your relationship with Jesus. And so I think we have 4 guys that value that across the board equally, so it should create some pretty good discussion and conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited about that conversation. We don't have it scheduled right now. Good thing is it's pretty easy to schedule, so I'm excited about having it.
Yeah, the guys are on staff or something like that, so it shouldn't be hard to find. Well, good. That kind of rounds this one out. I know we've been all over the place from Pinocchio to the Super Bowl, so hopefully you made it this far with us. If you did, then there's a good chance you will make it next week. But please do not forget to submit questions if you have questions from Sunday's content.
It would be great to have some questions from people.
Yeah.
Because that would also mean they may be listening to us.
Right.
You never know.
We like those. And then I would also say, continue to share this, continue to listen to this, download this, like this, subscribe, leave us a review. All those things help us push the content, and we wouldn't be pushing it if we didn't think it was valuable. So at least help us.
It's good. It's good. Nothing else. We have fun with these.
Yes. At the very least, we do have fun. Well,
last question.
Okay.
You going to watch Pinocchio?
Well, see, that's the thing. I got so domed up because I watched the new one. And in the new one, he's like, his legs are turning into real legs and the whole shebang. And
at the end of
Yeah, right. But I only watched a snippet. It's kind of like the second half of the football game. So I just got domed up.
We got this thing coming full circle. All right. Well, that's us. And I guess we'll catch you next time.
See ya. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk About That. We hope it encouraged and challenged you as we continue to grow in this journey of faith and embrace community. If you have more questions, thoughts, or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us through our social media channels or visit our website and stay connected. Your questions are what make this podcast a dynamic and enriching experience. If you found today's discussion meaningful, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your engagement helps us spread the message and connect with others who may find value in these conversations. Until next time, we hope this episode inspired you and will help you bring Sunday's message into your week ahead. Keep the conversation alive, and remember, we're all on this journey together.